The sun struck the earth with a punishing force, and in the clearing's heart, a single stake jutted upward. Tall, sharpened, merciless, it carved a thin shadow that cut across the sand like an old wound. Around it, men and women huddled together in strained silence, their eyes locked on the spot where torment was about to be staged. Soldiers adjusted their armor. Villagers drew children near. The air sagged heavy, not with suspense, but with fear. Through the dust, Bessus was dragged forward. His wrists were bound, his back bent beneath the shame crushing him, as he stumbled toward the wooden post that would erase him as a ruler and preserve him only as a warning. Once he had been a satrap of Persia, a man of wealth and command, a noble whose words carried armies. Now his face was swollen, smeared with blood and sweat, his body reduced by days of torture. He could barely raise his eyes to the stake's sharp point. This was no execution meant to end quickly. No trace of mercy shaped it. Its design was to stretch out every cry, to wring from its victim the bitter toll of betrayal. For Bessus was not another prisoner in Alexander's relentless march. He was a traitor, one who had turned on his king, Darius III, and sought survival through treachery. And Alexander would not forgive. The young conqueror had faced Darius in open battle, had hunted him through deserts and mountains. Even as rivals, Alexander regarded him with respect. But betrayal, the coward strike from behind, was unforgivable. And so, before thousands, Bessus would be raised onto the stake, his body pierced, his life stretched across hours of pain beneath the relentless sun. How had it come to this? How had a man who once ruled provinces, led armies, and commanded loyalty fallen into disgrace so absolute that his name echoed not as a king, but as a warning? This is a tale of ambition unchecked, of treachery mistaken for opportunity, and of vengeance delivered with cruelty meant to outlast its target. Stories like these expose the darker side of history, the parts seldom spoken of. If you value learning the ruthless truths of the past, subscribe to Disturbing Tale. If not, voice it in the comments and explain why you turn away from history's harshest lessons. After Gaugamela, Persia's heart was bleeding. The mighty empire that had stretched from the shores of the Aegean to the plains of India unraveled before the advance of a king barely in his 20s. Alexander's victory in 331 BC broke more than an army. It shattered the illusion of Persian might. Palaces stood abandoned, treasuries left behind, capitals deserted in haste. The great King Darius III, heir to a realm vast beyond measure, was reduced to a fugitive in his own lands. From Babylon he fled. From Susa he fled. From Persepolis itself, Persia's jewel adorned with columns and treasures beyond imagining, he fled again, leaving it to the fire of his enemy. His flight became a symbol. The King of Kings, bearer of Ahura Mazda's divine mandate, was reduced to prey, weary and stripped of the dignity that had cloaked the Achaemenid throne in unshakable authority. Among satraps, whispers spread like rot. Could a ruler who abandoned his capital still claim the crown? Soldiers who had once marched proud beneath the royal banners now muttered of endless retreat. Governors who had once trembled at Darius's word now questioned if loyalty meant walking blindly into ruin. The empire's foundations shook not by Alexander's armies alone, but by the decay of faith in their sovereign. It was in this atmosphere of despair that one man's ambition saw its chance. Bessus, satrap of Bactria, commanded one of the empire's strongest frontiers. His land spanned harsh mountains and fertile valleys, a crossroads of warriors and riches. Tall, imposing, with the thick beard of Persian nobility and eyes veiling sharp calculation, Bessus was far from a minor noble. He ruled as though he were a prince himself, and his word held the weight of entire legions. To many, he seemed a steadfast servant of Darius. He had fought at Gaugamela, standing firm as the empire's last hope collapsed beneath Alexander's charging cavalry. Yet loyalty is tested not in victory, but in ruin. And in ruin, Bessus saw not duty, but opportunity. With each step of Darius's retreat, the fractures in the empire widened. Every abandoned city made the king appear more fragile. In the ruthless arithmetic of ancient power, weakness was as fatal as steel. Bessus understood this. He watched carefully as his sovereign fled farther east. He noted the doubt in the eyes of fellow satraps. He listened as generals questioned whether Darius deserved allegiance at all. And within Bessus's mind, a thought rooted itself. Why remain loyal to a king who could not even hold his ground? Why waste Bactria's strength on a doomed cause? Ambition and survival whispered the same answer. He would not stand behind Darius. He would rise above him. History often shifts not on great clashes but on decisions born in desperation. In the wake of Gaugamela, Persia's course tilted. Bessus began to imagine himself not only as satrap but as successor. Not the servant of the King of Kings, but the King of Kings in his own right. He pictured the diadem on his head. He envisioned the empire restored, not under Darius's trembling hand, but under his own. Thus the seed of treachery was planted. Darius's retreat dragged on for months. Across deserts, through mountain passes, along royal roads, the once mighty ruler became a fugitive shuffled from stronghold to stronghold. His companions grew restless, loyalty eroded not only by defeats but by the shame of flight. In the eyes of his generals and satraps, every mile of retreat was another mile of disgrace. Among them was Bessus, flanked by other powerful men, Nabarzanes, commander of the royal guard, and Barsaentes, satrap of Aria. They rode beside the weary king, still outwardly obedient, yet inwardly conspiring. Each man knew the peril of continuing as they were. If Alexander captured them with Darius alive, they would be displayed as traitors to Persia and foes of Macedon. If they betrayed him, perhaps survival in Alexander's new order was possible. In whispered night councils, their scheme took shape. Bessus, the boldest, pressed the case. Darius had become a burden. He had squandered the empire's faith, abandoned its wealth, and carried only the stench of defeat. Why, Bessus asked, should they all be dragged to ruin for a king who had lost the future? He spoke with the weight of a satrap commanding a powerful province, and the others, tired and desperate, found his reasoning convincing. The decision was sealed: Darius must die, and Bessus would rise in his stead. It was the summer of 330 BC when betrayal struck. The royal caravan plodded eastward, slow and dispirited. Near Hecatompylos, Darius's weary party set camp. The king, sick and exhausted, rested in his carriage. Outside, desert winds carried whispers of treason. Under night's veil, Bessus and his allies approached. First, they urged the king to yield to Alexander, to preserve a fragment of dignity. Darius, battered but proud, refused. He would not bow to the Macedonian. He would not forsake the throne entrusted by the gods of Persia. The conspirators pressed no further. Blades flashed in the dark. Steel cut flesh. The King of Kings was struck down in his own carriage, his body pierced and left to bleed into dust. The wounds were not instantly fatal. Ancient chroniclers say he lingered, gasping, cursing the betrayers' names. His final breaths carried no forgiveness, only condemnation. He died not as a sovereign of legions, but as a broken figure betrayed by sworn guardians. When it was done, Bessus wasted no time. Seizing the void, he wrapped himself in authority's trappings and proclaimed himself Artaxerxes V, the new King of Kings. In his mind, the crown had merely passed from a faltering hand to a firmer one. He demanded loyalty from the troops. Some, fearing or seeking advantage, obeyed. Others hesitated, sensing not a true monarch but the gamble of an ambitious satrap. To strengthen his claim and prove his worth to the Macedonian rising power, Bessus chose a gesture he thought brilliant. Darius's severed head was preserved in salt, placed in a decorated vessel, and sent to Alexander as a sign of allegiance. To Bessus, it was the height of calculation: rid Persia of a failed king, present loyalty to the conqueror, and be rewarded as a client ruler under Macedon. Yet ambition clouds reason. When the grim token reached Alexander's camp, the response was fury, not gratitude. To Alexander, Darius was a true king, a worthy foe who had met him honorably in battle. To see him murdered by his own retainers was vile. Instead of honoring Bessus's gesture, Alexander ordered the envoys slain immediately. Darius's body, recovered from the desert, was granted royal rights, buried as befit the ruler of an empire. And with that funeral came a vow: Alexander swore to chase Bessus to the ends of the earth. The satrap who fancied himself king became the most reviled man alive. Picture it: you betray your king, risk everything, and still lose all. That is history's merciless truth. If you're not subscribed to Disturbing Tale, you're missing revelations like this. And if you refuse, leave a comment and explain why you'd rather remain blind. The ornate vessel holding Darius's head entered Alexander's camp with all the solemnity of a tribute. Bessus's envoys approached, expecting reward, even alliance, for eliminating his greatest rival. Instead, silence filled the tent. As Alexander gazed at what they delivered, he saw not loyalty but disgrace. He saw cowardice and an insult to kingship itself. Though an enemy, Darius had stood with valor on battlefields, commanded armies, and fought until no hope remained. Alexander had respected him. And here was proof that Persia's king was not slain by conquest but by betrayal. The envoys were cut down without delay. Alexander's wrath was swift, merciless, a warning to all watching: treachery bought no favor. Darius's remains were gathered, cleansed of betrayal's dust, and borne in solemn procession. The young conqueror decreed that his rival be honored with full royal burial. The rites were carried out as though Alexander himself were the dead monarch's heir. Draped in purple, guarded by solemn ranks, the body of Darius III was laid to rest with reverence. But the burial was more than respect, it was vengeance. In that ceremony, Alexander claimed himself the avenger of Darius, heir not just to his empire but to his honor. Before generals and soldiers alike, he swore his oath. Bessus would not escape. No desert, no mountain, no army could shield him from Alexander's vengeance. He would be hunted to the edges of the earth, and his death would be remembered less as justice than as a warning. This moment marked a turning point in Alexander's campaign. Up until then, his war had been conquest, armies marching, cities seized, territories claimed. But now, it became something far darker. The pursuit of Bessus was not strategy, nor was it expansion. It was personal, rooted in the young king's view of loyalty, betrayal, and revenge. Alexander could forgive defeat. He could respect an enemy who fought with valor. But treachery, the slaying of one's king for favor, could never be forgiven. His generals understood it. His soldiers whispered it among themselves. The march would halt. Conquests would wait. The vast engine of war, which had shattered empires and shaken the ancient world, would now turn its weight upon a single man. Later thinkers might call it obsession, but to Alexander it was honor. To him, kingship was not merely wielding power, it was protecting loyalty and punishing betrayal. To let Bessus live was to endorse treason. To ignore him would let disloyalty fester. Bessus's crime was not against Darius alone, but against rule itself. And so Alexander became not only conqueror but avenger. His empire advanced not for wealth or land, but for vengeance. Each step eastward, each village punished for hiding Bessus, each spy bribed to reveal his refuge, all of it bore the weight of that oath sworn beside Darius's body. Bessus fled east, abandoning the plains where kings had fallen, seeking safety in Bactria's unforgiving terrain. It was both fortress and prison. Jagged mountains stood like walls against the sky. Rivers carved deep scars into valleys. Tribes, hardened by generations of survival, endured only through ruthless strength. To Bessus, this was sanctuary. Among his own people, he thought he could rally enough force to withstand Macedon's tide. Here, he believed, Alexander would finally meet conquest's limit. At first, his hope seemed justified. In the narrow passes and shadowed canyons, Bactrian fighters struck the Macedonian lines. Ambushes filled the roads, stones rained from cliffs, arrows shrieked from unseen heights. Cavalry appeared, struck, and vanished into the hills, leaving chaos and corpses behind. The feared Macedonian phalanx, so unstoppable on plains, faltered in terrain where foes disappeared like smoke. But Alexander was not one to be turned back. Where other kings would have retreated, he pressed forward with a will that bordered on unnatural. He knew brute force would not end Bessus. To root him out, he used methods colder, sharper. He spun a network of spies, turning locals with gold, with threats, with the promise that betraying Bessus meant survival. Villages accused of aiding him were torched, their chiefs executed as warnings. Families who once fed or sheltered his men were struck with merciless precision. The lesson was clear. Stand with Bessus, and you perish. Stand with Alexander, and you prosper. Slowly, the noose drew tighter. What had begun as guerrilla resistance became a strangling net. Bessus's warriors dwindled. Supplies thinned. Dreams of resistance withered into whispers of doubt. The very tribes he trusted to guard him began to wonder if his cause was worth the ruin trailing in Alexander's wake. The satrap who once commanded thousands now watched his power unravel, his following shrink with every passing week. Desperation breeds treachery, and betrayal reached Bessus through Spitamenes, his final ally of weight. For months, Spitamenes had stood at his side, a noble with his own reasons to resist Macedon. But Alexander's pressure never eased, and the rewards offered for Bessus's capture gleamed brighter than loyalty. At a feast, Spitamenes offered him hospitality, pouring wine for the man he still called king. Yet in that cup lay the end of his ambition. The drink was laced. His strength ebbed. Arms that once commanded fell limp. Bound in chains, stripped of dignity, Bessus was handed over to those who loathed him most. Betrayal was complete. The man who had slain his sovereign to save himself had been undone by the same poison of treason he once unleashed. Treachery spares no one. It destroys kings, and it devours the traitors themselves. Bessus's allies turned on him as he had turned on Darius. If you're listening and haven't subscribed to Disturbing Tale, ask yourself, are you loyal to history, or are you the kind of traitor who scrolls past? If so, comment your excuse. The chains clattered as Bessus was dragged before Alexander. His once proud figure was a hollow shadow, clothes ragged, body weak, eyes empty from betrayal and captivity. He had been a satrap of vast command, a man who dared crown himself king. Now he was nothing but a prisoner before the conqueror he had tried to outwit. The tent fell silent, broken only by his stumbling steps. All eyes fixed on betrayer and avenger finally face to face. Alexander sat in the center, his expression carved of stone. He did not speak at once. He let silence smother the air, forcing Bessus to wear his shame. At last, the prisoner raised his gaze, offering not apology but justification. He claimed Darius had doomed Persia through weakness, that survival demanded decisive action, that killing the king spared deeper ruin. In his words, the blade had been necessity, not betrayal. His defense rang hollow, desperate. Alexander listened, his face revealing nothing. When he answered, his voice bore no fury, no mercy, only cold finality. Treason, he said, could never be excused. The betrayal of one's king was the lowest crime, tearing the sacred fabric of loyalty that bound men together. To cut down a ruler in weakness was not salvation. It was cowardice. Darius had fallen, but he fell with honor. Bessus had chosen dishonor. For that, there would be no pardon. Sentence was given, death by live impalement. It was no ordinary choice, nor common among Greeks. It was seen as barbaric, a cruelty of the East. That was exactly the point. Alexander wanted more than an execution. He wanted a spectacle, a memory seared into all who saw it. It was not quick justice, but deliberate terror, humiliation, and drawn-out pain meant to echo beyond Bessus's last cry. The punishment was as symbolic as it was savage. It declared betrayal so monstrous that only the most merciless end could match it. It told Persians and Macedonians alike that Alexander would not only rule with armies, but command through fear of treachery's price. This was no longer the Alexander who marched east dreaming of unity. This was a king willing to stain his hands with cruelty to guard the sanctity of loyalty. As soldiers looked on, as captives trembled in silence, the stage was set for one of antiquity's most infamous executions. At dawn, the air grew thick with expectation. The sun had barely risen when the crowd began to gather swelling numbers. Soldiers in bronze, villagers from nearby hamlets, merchants lured by rumor, even mothers with their children. Thousands pressed toward the rise overlooking the Macedonian camp. Whispers had spread like fire, and anticipation tangled with fear. Some sought justice, others craved cruelty made visible. All came to remember. At the hill's crest stood the stake, a single trunk sharpened to a merciless point, anchored deep into the soil. Ordinary in appearance, yet every eye knew its purpose. Around it, executioners arranged their instruments with practiced calm, men hardened by countless deaths. The silence thickened, broken only by a cough, shifting feet, the uneasy snort of horses. Then murmurs fell quiet as Bessus was led forward. The satrap who once commanded legions now stumbled like a thief, hauled by guards, his body ruined by captivity, his spirit bowed by doom. He scanned the masses and saw no allies, no loyal ranks, only strangers awaiting the ruin of his flesh. His eyes darted to Alexander, who stood unmoving, watching with a stillness colder than fury. The conqueror required no words. His presence was judgment. The executioners moved with ruthless efficiency. They tore away his garments, binding limbs to prevent resistance. The stake glinted under the sun. Then, in a motion learned through repetition, they drove the wood upward into his body, not to kill quickly, but to avoid the heart, lungs, and spine, prolonging his torment. His first scream split the silence, ragged and piercing, echoing across the valley. Men winced. Women turned away. But none fled. This was no scene to ignore. It was a decree carved in flesh. Hours dragged on. The sun burned overhead. Bessus writhed, his cries shattering into ragged gasps, his strength fading but his end withheld. Upright upon the stake, he became a monument of betrayal, punished without respite. Alexander did not flinch. He watched, transforming the execution into a ritual of judgment. His silence was deadlier than speech. Torches lit the night so suffering endured before men and gods alike. By morning Bessus still lingered, drifting between shrieks and unconsciousness, a sight so harrowing even soldiers hardened by war shuddered. On the second day, his heart finally broke. Death came not as dignity, but as collapse under endless pain. Yet peace was denied. His corpse was not buried or mourned, but left fixed upon the stake, high for all to see. Travelers glimpsed it on the horizon, a silhouette that warned of treason's fate. For a week the desert winds tore at him, the sun burned, and carrion birds circled overhead. The lesson was clear. Alexander's vengeance was total, his memory merciless. He had not simply killed Bessus, he had made his death a symbol. If you can endure such truths of history, you belong with disturbing tale. If not, admit in the comments why you'd rather avert your eyes from the past. With the last scream of Bessus faded, resistance in Bactria also died. His execution ended more than a man, it extinguished the hope of rallying Persia's east against Macedon's tide. Tribes that once offered him haven now submitted. Villages that defied him opened their gates. Terror had achieved what armies could not. Bactria, once a fortress of Persia, collapsed beneath Alexander's shadow. Yet the cruelty left its imprint not just on the conquered but on Alexander himself. Chroniclers noted the change once Bessus's body was left to the birds. He had begun as a visionary, a youthful king fueled by ambition and the dream of uniting East and West. Men followed him not only out of fear, but because they believed. His power came from inspiration. After Bessus, that vision darkened. The deliberate cruelty of the stake hardened him. Where once he inspired loyalty through charisma, he began to enforce it through dread. Every hesitant governor, every whispering general, every faltering soldier became to him a seed of treachery. The line between ally and traitor blurred, and suspicion gnawed at his throne. His companions noticed. Men who had marched beside him from Macedonia now spoke of his rages, his sudden punishments, his trust corroded. Friends became suspects. He forgave less, demanded more, and carried Bessus in memory as proof that betrayal could arise anywhere. His later campaigns bore this imprint. In Sogdiana, nobles who conspired were annihilated. In India, rebellion was crushed without pause. Even among his closest circle, the sword turned against men who once feasted at his table. To Alexander, mercy seemed brittle, fear unbreakable. Fear became his truest weapon, as potent as the spear or phalanx. What began as pursuit of glory shifted into rule by suspicion. To him, the stake was justice, but it carved a scar upon his soul. He learned treachery spreads like plague, and terror alone could purge it. From that hill in Bactria onward, his empire was bound not just by ambition but by the unspoken memory of a man writhing onward beneath his gaze. History measures empire in miles and battles, but its truer measure lies in its ruler's heart. After Bessus, Alexander's heart was changed. Brilliant still, unstoppable, worshipped as near divine, but haunted by mistrust that clung to him forever. In years that followed, Bessus's name lived on not with reverence, but with disgrace. He became a warning, a satrap who mistook betrayal for strategy and ambition for destiny. His story crossed deserts and mountains, carried by traders, whispered by soldiers, repeated in markets. Wherever it spread, it was tied not to honor, but to the stake where he perished. Chroniclers wrote in unflinching detail. They told of a man who slew his king only to meet destruction by the conqueror he sought to please. To them Bessus was no noble rebel, but a lesson carved in cruelty. Betrayal devours the betrayer. Above all, his fate was remembered not only for its torment, but for its meaning. Treachery, no matter how carefully plotted, yields nothing but ruin. It hastens collapse, speeding the ruin it was meant to avoid. In Persian memory, his treachery worsened the sorrow of Darius, whose final hours bore not the grace of a fallen monarch, but the blades of his own attendants. In Macedonian memory, his end strengthened Alexander's image of moral authority, the conqueror who avenged a rival instead of rewarding his assassins. And in later folklore, Bessus became a warning to every satrap, every commander, every ambitious noble who might dare to seize a crown by deceit. Alexander's legacy was shaped by brilliance and severity in equal measure. He is recalled as the conqueror who united vast portions of the known world, whose armies etched new boundaries into the map of antiquity. Yet beside that greatness lies the harsher edge, the ruthless punishments, the suspicion that consumed him, the merciless lesson displayed through the death of Bessus. The satrap's downfall revealed the dual nature of authority. It can inspire, but it can also instill dread. It can forge empires, but it can also fracture loyalty. Bessus endures as the clearest emblem of ambition without foresight. He commanded provinces, controlled loyal warriors, and might have been honored as a noble figure in history. But he miscalculated the man who pursued him. He assumed treachery would guarantee survival when instead it ensured his destruction. His legacy is not one of leadership or vision, but of disgrace. A man remembered for the stake that ended him. His ambition reduced to a warning etched in torment against the desert sky. 2 millennia later, the tale of Bessus still reverberates, reminding us that betrayal, ambition, and vengeance mold history. If you have watched until now without subscribing to Disturbing Tale, consider why you refuse the chance to learn from the past. Subscribe or explain in the comments why you would rather betray history itself. In antiquity, treachery was not just a crime. It was the unforgivable offense, the break that destroyed the foundation of loyalty, sovereignty, and order. Battles could be won and lost. Cities could be rebuilt. Even monarchs could fall and rise anew. But betrayal lingered like an injury that never closed. It carried a stain deeper than loss, a mark that consumed both victim and traitor. Bessus embodied that reality. He had reached for rule by killing his sovereign, and in so doing doomed himself to a punishment meant not only to end him, but to erase him. His body was left upon the stake for days, a grotesque figure against the pitiless sun. Desert winds swept around it, spreading the stench of decay across the valleys. Travelers on the road saw the sight, a man once wrapped in wealth and ambition, now a carcass pinned upright for the scavengers. Every gaze upon that ruined shape echoed the same truth. Loyalty may fail, armies may disperse, but betrayal never escapes justice. For the Persians, it stood as a bitter sign their old order was gone. For the Macedonians, it confirmed their king's fury stretched beyond the battlefield into the souls of those who defied him. And for Alexander himself, it marked both triumph and transformation. The moment he fully stepped into kingship, not solely through conquest, but through fear. The grim vision of Bessus on the stake still lingers. Not carved in stone, not preserved in shrines, but fixed in the memory of history. His cries are long since lost, but the lesson survives. To betray is to summon annihilation. To chase power without wisdom is to clutch only at ruin. And yet, this was but one among many ruthless lessons Alexander left inscribed in time. Lessons of vengeance, hunger, and cruelty that stretched far beyond his life, shaping the fate of empires yet to come. If you followed this story to its end, you know the past offers no kindness. It is harsh, merciless, and filled with shadows we dare not dismiss. Subscribe to Disturbing Tale if you are ready to keep stepping deeper into those shadows. If not, then share in the comments why you would rather turn from the truths that still haunt the winds of time.